All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Inflow's very first Google Analytics for office hours. I am Kate Miller. I'm the content marketing manager. I'm going to be a bit of the MC technical host for the event. We have Julia Morris, who is our lead analytics specialist, who's really going to be taking the reins on this office hours event and answering some of the questions that came through earlier from all of you registrants and tackling some of the recent updates with GA4 as well. So a few little housekeeping things to start. This is being recorded. It will be sent out to all of the registrants, probably at some point later today or tomorrow, and as well as some free little helpful resources we'll talk about in this office hours to help you understand a bit more and kind of dive into your GA4 stuff. As a reminder, we plan to do these every last Tuesday of the month. So we will be sending out an email next month with next month's date and all of that, so you can get it on a calendar if you find this event helpful and want to come back. So all that said, I am going to pass it over to Julia, who's going to kick us off.
And I will go ahead and share my screen. Now, a couple of housekeeping notes on my end. First one is that we are using the demo account today, which will lead to some limitations in what we can show. For example, there were some great questions that involve specific URL structures or specific events that the demo account just doesn't really have an equivalent for. Additionally, because of permissions on the demo account, there are some recommendations I might make, things I would save generally, that isn't possible to do in the demo account. Additionally, we did receive more questions than we are going to be able to get through in this time. So as a result, if there is a question that you are dying to get answered, one, we are saving questions for our next office hours, and two, if you need it answered sooner or you can't make the next one and you need your question answered specifically, please reach out to either your Inflow representative or Jen Holzman, whose contact information will be at the end of this, to talk about setting up a one-on-one individual training that we can do using your data, since it won't be shared with anyone else in that situation. Now then, starting off with some recent GA4 updates. The really important one to know about that is actually still rolling out is this change to key events that you can see right here. Previously, this was called conversions. However, last week, GA4 actually started changing the name to key events. This is still rolling out, so you may not see this in your account yet, or you might see it in parts of your account, but not all of your account. That is normal. It is okay. All of these will be renamed key events here. The exception is that in the advertising section over here, those are going to still be named conversions when they come in through Google Ads. Part of the rationale for this update is to make those conversions better aligned with the conversions you see in Google Ads. So again, if you're viewing any historical resource and it says conversions, take a look at what report they're looking at, because now the terminology might be key events. That is still rolling out, so what you see on your screen may not match what you see on mine. Additionally, because as many of you know, you can customize this sidebar. Again, what you're seeing on my screen may not exactly match what you see on your screen. This just happens when you make customizations, and I do recommend customizing your GA4 account to make the most sense for you. Now, a lot of the questions that we got revolved around reporting, how to do reporting, how do I look for this type of report? So that's where we'll begin today. Now, first, when I first sign in to GA4, you will see this nice homepage. Really, the goal here is just to give you an overview of the top things that GA4 thinks you should look at. So this is just what it sounds like. This is your snapshot. From there, I'm usually moving in to reports. And then I like to go into acquisition and look at the user and the traffic acquisition. These reports are different from each other and different from what was in UA, as the user acquisition report is showing us the very first traffic source for each visitor to the website, whereas the traffic acquisition report is showing us the very first traffic source of each session. If there's multiple sessions in this journey, only the first source is going to be reported in this report. I know there's been a lot of confusion about that, and people I know have seen this session group and think that it's equivalent to the UA session report. Not exactly. There's some differences in attribution, differences in what they're measuring. However, when I'm looking at GA4, this is where I start. Now, there's a couple questions on how to use this report. And now this report is generally set to session primary channel group. The definitions in here have changed from what they were in UA. So I do recommend taking a look through those definitions if you're confused on where anything is. The total number of channel groups between the two platforms has actually almost doubled. So it's important to know that some traffic that you may have used to think about in one channel might be in a different one. A really good example is paid in UA got broken into cross-network, paid search, display, and so there's definitely some changes in there, which will make it challenging if you're trying to look at your GA4 versus your UA data. Then going across the top, we again have your users, total number of active users, sessions, engaged sessions, average engagement time, etc. Cool thing about GA4 is that if you ever don't remember a definition, you can go ahead and hover over the metric here, and GA4 will provide you with a little bit more information. This is really helpful, especially when you're starting to learn it. Now, one of the customizations that I mentioned that I cannot do in this demo account is that in your own individual GA4, there will be a little pencil icon right here. If you don't see it, you probably don't have permissions that are high enough. I believe you need to be editor or higher. However, once you get that opened up, you can actually customize what metrics you see here. So for example, if your business is not an e-commerce business and you want to get rid of total revenue, instead of seeing a row of zeros here, great, you can do that. And that is a customization that I would recommend making if it makes sense in your case. Now, key events here by default is going to be all events that you have marked as a conversion or as a key event. If you're looking for one particular item, you can click this dropdown and take a look through here. I know that was a question that someone had asked. This is one way to do that. Additionally, you can go into this dropdown and take a look at the different dimensions that are available here. In this case, we have different default groups: source medium, source platform, and campaign. Now, this is where you can start customizing and digging in. Obviously, we can't get very into customizations today, but we can get into filters. I know one question was asking how to get in to look at different, I believe it was source medium for social media. So in this case, I'm in a session-based report, so I'm going to use a session-based dimension. So I'm going to do session default channel group. And in this case, I'm going to do exactly matches, and I'm going to come down here to organic social as my channel. I'm going to hit apply. Now, in this case, I didn't hit save or anything. This is not a saved modification. This is just a simple, in my screen, I'm looking at this modification. Now I can come down here and change this to session source and medium. Again, my channel is organic social only. There are different options here. You can choose multiple, you can do does not contain, many different choices here, but I can come down here and get this list. So in here, I can see sites.google.referral, mobile Facebook, Pinterest, etc. In this case, all I knew to choose organic social when looking for these social media sites because I know the channel definitions in this case. This is a scenario where you might want to take a little bit of a look through the channel definitions to see what one makes the most sense for you. You can also do this with a variety of different channels. So let's say I was also curious in my organic search. I could come in here and hit apply and take a look here. Google organic, okay, Bing organic. And again, I have my date selectors up here, and then I can scroll down to compare, turn on compare, can do preceding period with matching days of the week, same period last year, preceding period, same period last year, or custom. So in this case, let's say I'm interested in how much my Google organic traffic changed period over period. I would just turn that on, take a look here. And I do have these total rows here for all of this. However, in this case, I'm only interested in Google organic. So I would be looking at this row for those differences. Now, this is a report, which again, demo account limitation, I do tend to make copies of and save to make different customizations. For example, working on SEO, I often make a copy of this and save with the default channel to organic search, so I can look at sources and mediums easily for clients without having to make a lot of changes here. This can also be a really good way to take out metrics you're not interested in to make copies to look at very specific things. I know another question that you might think would be one way to do this was looking at website sources for forms and conversions, and how do we get to that? Now, this is a situation where you could create a copy of this report and make some customizations there. However, you would have to use this dropdown still to see what those are. In that scenario, if you were to make a copy, you might want to take out things like total revenue or events per session, because they would be metrics that may not apply in that case. However, you could also use an exploration. Now, explorations are very, very powerful tools within GA4, and they are something that I do recommend you make part of your reporting capabilities. That being said, they have some pretty significant limitations. They are very powerful and they are very cool. However, they're not intuitive, and by default, they're only going to be visible to you. So if you're trying to create a resource for your whole team, you're going to have to share it. And even if when you share it, it's only going to be available in read-only mode. So your team members are not going to be able to get in there and change the date, which can be a little bit of frustrating. Additionally, they can run into some pretty significant thresholding, and that is just there's so much data that it can't process. If you are running into really significant thresholding in GA4, and in a minute I will show you what that looks like, you can try a couple different things. You can either try taking out some dimensions and some metrics out of your report, or you can try to decrease the date. However, at times, it just is unfortunately is what it is. So in this report example, or in this website example for specific events, in this case, this is a free-form exploration that I set up earlier. In this case, wasn't sure if we wanted to look at first user or by first session, so I just used first user here. This would be something that as part of your reporting strategy, you would want to think, do I want to use session or user? That's always something we recommend taking a deep look at, having these discussions. In this case, I just picked user. And in this case, I'm looking at my first user default channels. I have my event names. So I added event names into my rows here. And then I have my active users, my event counts, and then I have my key events down here. I dragged all of these in so I can exit, and then I can bring this back by dropping it in. Let's say I want to get a new dimension in here, or let's say I'm interested in looking at region for these. I would come in here, I would find it, and I have to hit import. It then appears here, and then I can either drag it or I can double click to add it to this. Now, in this case, it is only looking at key events with how this is set up. So I can see the number of key events here, and I can see the name here. Now, in this case, we can see that there is a not set here, and that just means GA4 doesn't have that data for what region this view item direct came from, and that's okay. Earlier, when I mentioned sampling, in this case, I know it's unsampled because I have my green check mark, and it says unsampled exploration. This report is based on 100% of available data. In the case that this is sampled, you will usually be able to see a percentage. This percentage might be very, very low, so I do caution you on using this data sometimes. I think the lowest I've ever seen has been below 10% of available data because we were trying to pull so much information into that report. And in that case, we really had to have some tough decisions about what was important to be in there and how far out the date realistically needed to be. That is all part of your reporting strategy that we just recommend discussing with each other, with your agency, to make sure that you are getting the data that's the most meaningful to you. Now, before I get into some other reporting questions that we have, let's take a minute to talk about GA4 versus Universal Analytics, since there's a couple questions about that as well. So in short, comparing against UA is not something we recommend doing in terms of apples to apples. And reasons for this are very numerous. First of all is that GA4 changed the definition for a lot of this information. So even though you will still see users and sessions here, the definitions for those metrics has changed. We are going to be sending out a GA4 versus UA little cheat sheet after this with the recording, so you can take a look at that for some more information. However, because all of these other metrics and so many other metrics will build on that information, it's really hard to compare them. Additionally, like we talked about, GA4 versus UA have entirely different channel definitions. They can use different attribution. Their retention policies are different. Things like sessions are not restarted at midnight, so they're typically lower. GA4 is better at tracking users across different devices. And so users is sometimes lower than UA, but that doesn't mean always. And that's not even getting into other factors, like is one of your GA4 or your UA including a subdomain that the other is not. It's really, really challenging to compare these, and we usually just recommend looking for trends as opposed to using exact metrics. Another area that you might think could be the same is key events versus goals and total revenue. However, still not exactly. It's not as simple as you might think. So key events or conversions, as they have been known until last week, yes, might be the same events that you were tracking in your UA. However, GA4 removed a restriction that was in UA. The restriction in UA was that a goal would only fire once per session. So let's say someone on your website fills out 2 contact forms. UA probably only would have counted that as 1 goal completion, whereas GA4, unless the setting is changed, will by default count that as 2 forms. So right there, even though it's the same user, 1 session, you're going to have a difference in those conversions. Additionally, a lot of people use this opportunity when building their GA4 to revisit their reporting strategy, maybe track some different events, maybe track them a little differently based on their web development needs, which is something we very much encourage. So they might also be set up a little bit differently. They might be tracking a little bit more exact. It might be the same name, but defined a little bit differently. These are all things you need to keep in mind when you're comparing GA4 versus UA. Additionally, total revenue. You would think that they're both Google Analytics, so total revenue and purchases are going to be exactly the same. And unfortunately, the answer is no. They use different collection methods, so unfortunately, it's not one-to-one. The setup is different. If they're both well set up, we do generally expect them to be similar, but we do find that there will be times that GA4 missed a purchase that UA picked up, vice versa. That's also assuming that you are using the same events in both, such as purchase. If you're only tracking refunds in one, not the other, if only one is factoring in coupon codes, again, all of those can be factors in why GA4 and your UA are going to be different. So unfortunately, there's no simple answer for comparing UA versus GA4. Now that actually ties in really well with another question that we got about setting up exact revenue in GA4. And the short answer is that your GA4 revenue will almost never be exact. It's always going to miss purchases, which is unfortunate and kind of just, it is what it is. There are tons of reasons for this. For example, JavaScript being disabled, if you have cookie consent and people opt out, ad blockers, if your transaction's too big, GA4 can actually miss it. If people leave the page very, very quickly before the event fires, that can be a factor. Now, there are some ways you can mitigate them. And if you are interested, I would encourage you to reach out to chat directly. However, I will still caution you that they tend to not be perfect and the level of effort is very, very high. Some of those ways include server-side tracking and measurement protocol. Again, they are an improvement, but I don't know if I would say they were perfect. And the level of effort to set those up is higher than the general GA4 eCommerce setup. So that is something to keep in mind, is just the level of effort there. Is it really worth it? Now, natural follow-up question here is, what's an acceptable range for missed transactions? And unfortunately, there is no one answer we can give here. It's going to vary depending on your business, based on your location. Are you in a location that requires you to use very strict cookie consent? Do you maybe work in an industry where people are very concerned about their privacy and more likely to use ad blockers? Anything along those lines can be a factor. So something to keep in mind. We also did get a number of questions about different platforms you can set up GA4 on. And one of the big ones, Shopify. There's a couple different ways you can actually set up on Shopify. Again, I don't have a demonstration that I can show with this, but very quickly to review, Shopify does have a native integration. It is using GTag and it does not include some common e-commerce events. I believe it's view item list, select item, refund, and I believe it doesn't fire on upsells. I do believe there's a couple more it misses. I don't think it tracks coupon codes. So not perfect. You can also use several different apps, which is generally what we recommend. integrate those with your GTM, which allows you the ability to create more custom events in the future. That is usually what I recommend. If you're interested in talking about that in more detail, please reach out. On most other platforms, my answer is use a plugin where you can. GA4 does require pretty significant data layer setup, and make this easy on yourself if you have the option to use a plugin. Otherwise, you will be getting into some very significant manual data layer setup. This is from the Google itself documentation. This is just one example of a data layer push code, and you will be adding these manually if you cannot find something to help you out. When you can, use it, plugin, app, something that can give you a hand. Now, we have a lot more reporting questions, so we'll get back into those. Next one to get into is landing page. Now, landing page report was not actually launched with GA4 when GA4 went live. Off the top of my head, I believe it came out in November 2022, but please don't quote me on that date. Point there is that if you look far enough back at your data, this report won't exist. It wasn't around before then. There were workarounds where you could use it in exploration. So if you're looking at a more dated resource, you might see that. Landing page is what it sounds like, where you have your landing page and some metrics. This is another report that I frequently customize and save my customizations on to look at specific channel performance. So if you're looking for your specific landing page for ads from social, this is a landing page that I would recommend making a copy of, making those modifications and saving so you can easily access it in the future. Another thing that you can do in these reports is that you can add a second dimension in here. So in this case, this is a session-based report, and I'm interested in adding session default channel group here, taking a look at what channels people are coming to these landing pages on. So in this case, I can see direct to this Google redesigned stationery is our top landing page. I might also be interested in changing this to source and medium, changing the dates to really get an idea of where my users are landing on my website and what they're looking at, how they're getting to my site. Another report that I frequently see misunderstood, and we've had a lot of questions about, is pages and screens. Pages and screens is probably the most misunderstood report in my experience. And the reason I say that is that report is looking at what happened on that page, not how people got there, not where they went, what happened on that page. So for example, I see this order completed, and I see all of the revenue here on this page. This makes sense because this is where the purchase event fires. All of the revenue should be on this page in this report. Again, this report is not looking at how people got there, why they got there, what category did they purchase from. This report is solely looking at what happened on that page. So again, revenue is here. Some people are definitely a little concerned when they see it all happened on their order complete page, think maybe GA4 is not attributing their revenue to categories. This is not a sign of that. Don't be alarmed. Again, we see a lot of our key events happen here. A lot of this is probably purchase, but I can also filter this here and take a look here. In this case, when I open up this dropdown, I see they have add to cart and view item also marked as key events, which when I take a look at this makes sense. These look like a lot of category pages and product pages. So it makes sense that people are viewing their items and adding them to their carts on this page. Because what you mark as a conversion or key event is personal to you, yours will not look like this. It might be something else. If you have a form submission, you might see a thank you for submitting your contact form URL in here. That makes sense for you. Just take a look through this report, get familiar with your data. Again, event count. This is all events right now. So if I look at add payment info and filter by that, again, payment URL is where the add payment events are happening. Makes sense. This report can be really great to give you an idea of what your users are viewing. This view is the number of page views in that date range. So the page view event in GA4. So this is essentially what you can think of as your most popular content. But again, this is not by channel or anything. I would, in many situations, make a copy of this, filter it to be by your specific channels that you're interested in. This is another report where you can add a second dimension, such as landing page. But again, this is just telling you that they landed on this page and had a page view of this. This is not telling you how they got between the two, what they did between the two, how long it took them to get there. This is just telling you that they landed on this page and had a page view of this in the same session. Definitely think that people can get a little confused when we do this and put this landing page in here and think, wow, they immediately went over to this page. How did they get there? That's not necessarily the case. So that is just something important to keep in mind here. Another very, very important report is your e-commerce purchases. This report looks pretty different than it did in UA, but this report is essentially what it sounds like. It's your purchases by your item name. This report will look very different depending on your business. And the reason I say that is items viewed add to cart versus purchased is going to vary a lot. If you are someone who has a lot of items on your homepage and your items viewed event fires there, this numbers might be very, very high in comparison to your add to cart. If you are someone, maybe you sell parts, who someone can buy your product by the 300, by the 10,000, add to cart might look absolutely ginormous because someone added 10,000 screws to their cart. Same thing with items purchased. Just something to keep in mind, know your own business, know your own data there. This by default is looked at items viewed. This is another report that you can customize. Say add to cart wasn't a priority for you when setting it up, so this column's all 0 and you want to get rid of it. This is a report that in your GA4 you can customize to get rid of that. Item revenue can be another little bit of a tricky one, and that is total revenue of the items only minus refunds, does not include tax and shipping. There are multiple revenue numbers within GA4, and some of them will include different things. I really do recommend that whenever you are looking at a revenue number in GA4, that you hover over it and see what exactly you are viewing in that revenue number. You might see that the one you are looking at does include tax, does include shipping, does not include refunds, does include refunds. Really important for you to know what revenue data you are looking at. So something to keep in mind here. Additionally, you have this dropdown. By default, this report goes to item name. That can be changed, but you have additional options. Item ID is one. If you are a business where your item ID and your item name are the same, this might look the same. You also, in some cases, might get down to category. Now, if you are on some platforms, you can only get down to category. I don't believe you can get any further, but GA4 does allow you to get down to category 5. These categories are, again, if you are not using all of these, I don't believe this one is using category 4, for example, you'll just see not set. This is another area that you can customize your GA4 or ask someone else to customize it for you so that you don't have to see these blank reports. Another really important one to know is item variant. In this case, you see that it's sizes. This is a demo merch account. So we see like large, medium, XL, etc. Depending on your business, you might not be using this, or you might be using things like new, used, refurbished, pink, green. There's a whole different variety of what might be in here. And again, that just depends on how your GA4 was set up. Similarly, item brand will only apply if you sell things that are from different brands. So in this case, we see Google, Google Cloud, YouTube, Android. If everything you sell is under your own brand, this might, again, be a dimension that makes sense taking out from this report. However, if you are an e-commerce business that is more of a marketplace, sells things from a lot of different brands, this can be a great way to take a look at what brands are selling the best according to GA4. Now, again, your internal data will be more accurate, will be a little bit better in terms of providing you with exact numbers since GA4 data is not perfect. However, this can still be a really great way. Additionally, this is another report that you can filter and save modifications for. I often will create versions of this for different channels to get an idea of what's performing in different channels, so I don't have to pull that data up and look at that. So if you're curious, for example, what brand is selling best from your Google Shopping, filter that. Go ahead and find that out. You can save that modification, make it easy for you to see in the future. Another report that you'll hear talked a lot about is events. Now, these events are just looking at things, they're looking by events, as the name suggests. There's been a bunch of changes to this recently, so depending on what report source you're looking at, it might actually look a little different. When you click into a specific event in that scenario, though, you will see a screen that kind of looks like this. However, depending on any custom dimensions or metrics you've set up here, for example, here, search term, you will see additional information here. So in this case, it looks like they set up some custom dimensions or metrics for session content, search term, and search keyword. So these, when it says not set, it didn't fire on this event. However, here we can see shop now button, lunar, new year banner, etc. So it looks like people were on that content when they engaged here. However, this is a demo account, so this is something that I would look for any documentation on to say for sure. If you had someone do your GA4 setup, this is a question I would ask them when you start digging in, just to confirm and make sure you understand that you're looking at the right thing. Custom dimensions and metrics are wonderful things. They are how we measure attributes that are not in GA4 by default. So let's say that for some reason you couldn't use item variant for size and you needed to set up a custom parameter for size, just called size. That would then be something that you could set up in your data layer, make sure it was sending to your GA4, and then register with your GA4 so that you would be able to use that in reports. Again, this is part of developing a well thought out reporting strategy that we recommend discussing with whoever your partner is, just to make sure that it makes the most sense for you. There are times where, and I'm sure some of you on this call are not using custom dimensions or metrics because you don't need to, and that is fine. You don't need to use them just to use them. You're not necessarily missing anything. It's just about what makes the most sense for your business. GA4 in general is significantly more individualized than UA was. So it's really, really important to keep your business and your goals in mind when you are creating your reporting strategy and when you're looking through your data. Things that might seem weird in someone else's GA4, for example, adding 3,000 of something into the cart at once, they might be normal in your business. So again, do your best to just know your business and discuss with your partner of any sort of reporting strategy that you need in order to make your GA4 the best for you that it can be.
Awesome. Great. I think that will probably be about it for us today. As mentioned, we are going to be doing this monthly. So if any questions pop up between now and the end of April, feel free to reach out to us or register for the next event and we can get those questions answered. As well as if you're diving into your GA4 after this office hours and kind of taking a closer look or whatever, and things pop up that you're not sure about, we're always available to help. I will send out a link in the recording with our library of GA4 guides. So we have a lot of helpful blogs about comparing UA and GA4, as well as some tools that we've provided for free. So I will make sure to send those out to everybody who has registered, and that way you can dive a little closer into some of this stuff. As mentioned, our next office hours is April 30th. So make sure to put that on your calendar and we will send out a reminder beforehand. And then finally, as Julia was mentioning throughout, if you're having any, in-depth issues with GA4, or you really want to take a closer personalized look, we do offer training sessions similar to this office hours, except Julia would be going through your own account information and really diving more into that data and saving those reports that she mentioned that she could not save in the demo account. So if you are interested in that, reach out and we can talk a bit more about that. Thank you, Julia. I really appreciate all of the helpful stuff that you walked through.
Thank you for your time, everyone. As mentioned, we did get a number of questions that time-wise we weren't able to fit in that we have saved, but keep submitting them.